Last year, I pivoted from fiction or nonfiction to fiction writing, but I knew I needed a little bit of help perfecting my craft of fiction writing. That's why I hired a writing coach. Her name's Jeannie DeVita, aka Callie Chase, to really help me write much better. Initially, my plan was to publish on Kindle Vella, but I'm looking to expand into selling more books through Amazon KDP. Find out how authors should hire a pro, and will it help sell more books in today's podcast? So make sure you want to stay tuned.
Learn how to publish books and build your author business with award-winning author and self-publishing consultant Dale L. Roberts. This is the Self-Publishing with Dale podcast.
Okay, so my goal for 2022, this past year, was simply to pivot from nonfiction writing over to the world of fiction. This is something I've wanted to do since I was a boy. I honestly don't know how I ended up in this path, because I started out wanting to do fiction writing, went to college to get into journalism, to start writing nonfiction work, dropped out of college. You fast forward some years later, 20 years into the healthcare industry, I decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to write a book about health and fitness. And so then I started getting into this vicious cycle of writing nonfiction books, and fiction just kept getting put off to the side. I dabbled with it, I played with it, but I never really fully focused on it. So that was one of the reasons why I just really was like, okay, we got to do this. Let's just put everything on hold to focus 100% on fiction. And here is the funny part. I still had 5 nonfiction books that were pretty much fully written. I already had the rough drafts done, and I think about 4 of the manuscripts already had the first edit done on it. And that was already late 2021. So I went into 2022 with these publications and going, well, it's just going to have to wait. So I put a pin in those publications to focus on immersing myself in fiction 100%, because I'm the type of person that you can get me distracted by just about anything out there. I mean, just honestly, I just shiny object syndrome often. Absolutely. It's a terrible thing for me here. So that's why I was like, okay, we're going to go 100% in fiction. And I really, really want to do this right. Now, late 2021, I actually interviewed the illustrious Callie Chase. And this was talking to her about Kindle Vella. And in my research for doing the interview, I really just did some deep digging. And, you know, not only was she and she still is, a top fave Kindle Vella author, she's also a second generation author. Her mother actually used to write for Harlequin, which is freaking cool if you don't mind me saying so. She's also been an editor for traditional publishing authors as well as indie authors. And after all that digging that I did, I found on her website that she actually offered writing coach services. And I'm like going, okay. You're probably saying, but what does that have to do with anything here? So before I jump into everything and I just go any further, I think it's important. I'm going to probably say 2 names at some point or another. It's the same person. So for simplicity's sake, I will refer to Callie Chase by her real name, which is Jeannie DeVita. Absolutely one of the nicest human beings on the face of this planet. Love working with Jeannie. You're going to find out why here as we're talking a little bit more about hiring a writing coach. So why did this work for me? Why was it one of those instances of, okay, what made Jeannie so special? I mean, we've already talked about some of those things, but how did that align with my mission to go into fiction? Because you can get just about any writing coach, but to me, it was the niche that she was in. First of all, her Kindle Vella series, Bug, was top faved at the time. I think it was even in the top 20, to tell you the truth. And it was also highly endorsed by the head of Kindle Vella, Virginia Milner. So I'd already got that stamp of approval, like, this is great. So I ended up getting quite a few episodes of Bug and just reading through it and thought, this is exactly what I'm shooting for, because she was doing horror writing. And that was where I was headed to, doing science fiction horror books. And I really wanted to not get all in on this. I didn't want to go all the way in, meaning that, you know, I didn't want to spend a lot of money. That's where cost comes into here, folks, because I didn't want to publish this full-length book. Nothing like a novella or novel. Because as you can imagine, a novella and novel requires, first of all, a ton of editing, which means that's a lot of money. It's going to require a very detailed cover, which that's going to require a significant amount of money. And that's where I kind of looked at Kindle Vella. it was the opportunity that I felt, you know what? It seemed like a perfect fit for me to craft short form content while gaining a deeper insight into writing better fiction. So it's better that I, go and write, say, a 2,500 word manuscript and have a bunch of things that are messed up developmentally or a lot of copy editing needed. 2,500 words versus 25,000 or, worse yet, 80,000 or 100,000, that's going to be a lot of money. So Kindle Vella just seemed like it was a good fit because it only required one cover and one description. Super simple. So I mitigated those costs by working with the writing coach to clean up my work, and then I would publish my homework. So essentially, I was monetizing my homework, which is fantastic because in high school or even college, there was no way anybody was going to pay me for my homework, but this was kind of a cool thing. So how long did I work with Jeannie? Now, let's go ahead and discuss each one of the sessions that I had with her because I was working with her on a weekly basis for most of 2022. And we did, I think, every Friday night, which was fantastic. We'd sit down for video chat. And typically I would have some type of homework, whether it was fixing an episode or it was completely writing the episode and giving it into her hands. Now, she was really super cool because what she would do is she would go through and edit everything. And for each one of those sessions, she would just edit that stuff as part of those sessions. So we could sit down and discuss what needed to be fixed and why. So I would typically get that manuscript back before we'd meet up, and I would have a ton of red marks. They were just all over the place. And my spirit was slightly crushed, but I always knew Jeannie had a good heart and it came from a good place anytime she was correcting me. And so we would sit down for these sessions and, typically we just kind of jib jab about this and that, and we'd jump right into the manuscript and we would go in and just talk about each one of the pieces. Now, she always focused on the developmental area. Now, if you're not familiar with what I say in developmental editing, it's looking at the structure of the story. I think a lot of people, when they're looking at editing, they think that editing is merely fixing typos, grammatical errors, wrong word choice. That is more of a copy editing or line editing type situation. For developmental, you're just looking at what does this story look like? How is this structure working out? And does it make sense? Will it make sense to my readers? So we would go through and break that down on a developmental level. Most instances, we would get together to talk about the developmental side of things. And every now and then we would go into smaller copy editing things because she would say, okay, this sentence, it doesn't work, or you've used the wrong word for here because you're looking to say, get more of an aggressive feel in this scene, as opposed to this really light, flowery language. And it was always just super fascinating for me to hear it from an outside perspective. Not to mention, it's a trip to hear somebody else talk about these imaginary characters that I came up with. And it almost started to feel more personal. Like that story started to feel more real to me. And so as the episodes were kind of progressing, and as I was writing each one of them, I started feeling like I knew my characters better by just talking these characters out with Jeannie. It was very therapeutic. That was the very first thing. And also a very interesting, character study, if you will, when you're deep diving into these things. Will this character do X, Y, and Z? What motivates this character? What, more importantly, motivates this character in this moment that I'm writing? And that to me was just stellar. So yeah, usually it was developmental and just structural type level things. Now we would get on those line editing areas, but for the most part, usually whenever she would have those corrections, she would put it in the notes in the second version of things, because she would every now and then catch some little copy editing type things, just small things, but usually she saved that for the second round. So I would go through, I would correct everything developmentally after a specific session, I would shoot it back to her, and at that point typically she's going in and trying to pick apart any type of structural issues, and then if it was good, typically she's going through and then copy editing, really just getting in with just that magnifying glass and just focusing on those things. So I would just really kind of get dialed in on that stuff. Now, it was slow at first. Not going to lie to you. It was very tough. And every now and then I would be the type of person that would get in my own way because I would have homework that would be due. And for instance, I'd get busy doing YouTube things, or I would just stare at the manuscript and just kind of wonder and think, okay, well, maybe I'll just save this for the very next session. And the beauty of working with her was she actually had email support integrated with it, like unlimited email support. So anytime that I had issues, I could just email her direct right away. And she would usually respond within a day and give me any type of notes. So sometimes I would find that I would get stuck on a couple of different concepts and I would just bullet point those things out in the email and then highlight those in the manuscript that I would send back to her. So there was a lot of volleying back and forth via email usually, but by the time we got together for the 1-hour video chat, it was usually a great situation for me to just kind of sit under the learning tree and just kind of see what her thought process was. And there was one of the times I'd handed in my homework. This was pretty funny. I did it like probably an hour before we were supposed to meet. So it really didn't give her enough time to sit down and do it. And this was the cool part. She goes and she does a screen share and she's looking at the manuscript, which by the way is just absolutely nerve-wracking watching somebody read things, but she was so fast and so efficient at it. I even said to her, I'm like, how are you doing this? She's literally having a conversation with me as she's just reading this at the same time and giving me notes as she's going along, which is just stellar. I don't know if there's any other writing coach that can do that. If they can, man, you better keep them for a long time. So was my writing good before working with Jeannie? Now, according to her, it was passable. But she did mention that it needed a lot of developmental work and obviously some copy editing to clean up the language just a little bit. But she'd commented that she'd seen so many other authors out there that were doing a far worse job. So I was doing pretty good. That wasn't enough for me to go, well, I'm all done with you. I don't need you anymore. Getting that stamp of approval was fantastic, but I always felt like I could always be better. So that's what kept me coming back because I wanted to improve my fiction writing. Now, how was my writing after working with Jeannie? Now, according to my beta reading team, fantastic guys, by the way, big shout out to Bill, Thomas, and Mark. You guys were just the best beta readers there is. And I had a handful of others that kind of peeked in and peeked out. But, that's totally fine. But they said my writing became stronger with every episode, which was super encouraging. But as I went back and I would reread my first few episodes, and I did that more recently, I was amazed how much more room for improvements there were because I was able to kind of get a better idea of structure and pacing and understanding character, character development and getting it to where what makes sense for these type of things. So I was improving with each one of these episodes. Now this year, we're going into 2023 here, I'm talking about, I returned to those nonfiction books that I had wrote back in 2021. And I'm prepping them for a launch. It's going to be pretty massive. In fact, I've got a total of about 6 publications, and I have another 4 publications that I'll be updating. Now, even my nonfiction writing is tighter, cleaner, and super clear because there were some rules that I feel were universally applicable between nonfiction and fiction, and understanding what does the structure look like? How am I pacing this? What can I do better to where it's not some boring textbook and more so an exciting nonfiction book that people are going to want to read from cover to cover? And so I was blown away. Didn't even have to open up Pro Writing Aid or mess around with that because I'm just literally going through and doing my own editing because of how much I had learned over 1 year of working with her. So did working with a writing coach help sell books? That's the whole crux of this. This is where everybody's kind of wondering. Well, writing isn't about selling to me. It's more about creating a viable product that readers can come to time and again. Because that's the thing, is if you've got crappy writing, yeah, sure, we can all say it's all subjective. That, everybody can kind of say, okay, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Okay, this is good. But sometimes you can read someone's fiction and say, this is super clean, this is super clear. I may not agree with the direction of it. It may not be my taste, but typically you can read that type of things. So getting it to where you are writing better is going to keep readers coming back for more. So that way subsequent publications or even backlog of publications that you have, readers are going to go through and buy those things. It's about building that trust with your readership to where they understand and they know that, hey, I've purchased this book by Dale L. Roberts. I've read this book. I enjoyed it. I want to go to the next one. Because let's face it, even a crappy book can be able to get its day in the sun with a good marketer behind it. And great marketers can sell crappy books, yes. But the problem is they also erode that trust with that specific reader. I've read quite a few books over the years. In fact, even more recently, that I've taken a gamble on some authors I've never heard of before, only to find out that it's not good. Heck, I just read a book by Clive Barker, The Hellbound Heart, and it wasn't good. There was just lack of developmental editing. There was a lack of copy editing. There was typos, grammatical errors. Heck, there was even missing punctuation. And I'm not going to read another Clive Barker book. I'll go watch his movies, but ain't going to read his book because he's already eroded that trust with me. And so I think if you're thinking about, okay, writing coach, will that sell more books? Indirectly, yeah. The return on investment isn't going to be immediate, obviously. There's no real way to measure the difference. We could all agree. So would I recommend a writing coach? Yes. If you have any number of these issues, confidence issues, that was my biggest issue, was I didn't have the confidence to go and publish this type of stuff. Sure, I could have found an editor that would have gone in and cleaned up those things, but I never had context before. I've always had editors that have gone in and fixed some things, but it usually would be, oh, I disagree or I agree. It was just knee-jerk reactions, and I'm putting out some stuff that I didn't know who, what, where, when, and why of those corrections. Now, with that fiction writing coach that I worked with, my confidence definitely improved. And she could even sense that with every, episode. She was seeing that I was pacing my episodes better, that I was writing clearer, that I was not, falling into some of the, pitfalls when it comes to fiction writing. And also, it's going to be for somebody who needs just a little bit of outside influence, because there were times that I felt like I painted myself back into a corner. It was almost like, ooh, I put a lot of really high stakes and tensions built. And then next thing I know, I go, I don't know how I'm going to do this. It was almost like I was Houdini, shackled and put underneath the water and said, hey, why don't you see about breaking out of there? I don't even know how to pick a lock. So getting that outside influence really helped out. So when I got stuck on some issues, I would sit down and I would chat with my writing coach about that. And, I learned a lot about the business end of things of publishing, such as marketing and reader insights and so much more. Not to mention, I got a lot of recommendations on writing craft books. I've got a ton on my shelves right now. So would I recommend hiring a writing coach? Yes. If you have the discretionary expense, do it. But you must temper your expectations for writing coaches. Their main purpose is to make you a better writer. So that's my thoughts on talking about hiring a writing coach and selling more books because of getting a writing coach. Now, I anticipate that I will start working with Jeannie again, probably a little later into this year. Right now, I'm a little bit of a pause as I'm putting my nonfiction projects together. And hey, speaking of Jeannie, and of course, her pen name, Callie Chase over at Kindle Vella, next week we'll be discussing why I'm actually done with Kindle Vella and a deeper dive into the problems and concerns plaguing Kindle Vella, because that is a real deep subject. Hey, hit me up over on Discord. I definitely would love to hear your thoughts. Go visit me on over at dalelinks.com/Discord. Till next week, this has been Self-Publishing with Dale, and I'll catch you then.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing with Dale podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingwithdale.com for more information on how you can level up your self-publishing business. Also, check out our growing video on demand service, chock full of free and premium content, when you head over to theselfpublishinghub.com. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a review on your preferred podcasting platform. We thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.